There is sometimes a situation where someone will explain that, the concepts, the understanding, even though it's what is being said is sort of believed to be understood, doesn't make a practical difference, as in doesn't bring the suffering to an end. And that tends to be the case when the identity and the structure is quite intense, and the thinking about guilt and blame, pride, expectations, trying to get somewhere, is more obsessive in a way. And what that essentially means is that because the identity, which we all have, is essentially a mind-based sense of self, a thinking-based sense of self, that there is an experience of being the thinking, and the thinking being particularly confined to continuing going. There isn't an outside that space. There isn't access to an outside that space. And if that's the case, then the words, the concepts are going to be heard by that entity, and the assumption of that entity, which has been the assumption of that entity for the whole of its existence, is that now I need to do something with this information. So now I need to get somewhere with this information. Now I have this information so that it can be useful and bring about a change. And of course, if the information is heard by that entity, which is the problematic identity, and that entity then turns that information into something it needs to work with, what it will do with that information is think about that information. And the assumption it has is that when I understand what the information is saying, which means I really need to have an objective of getting somewhere with the information and a change happening because I have this information. So I really need to understand it. And when I understand it, then that will be when the result happens. And that may, in fact, or if that's happening, that is the perpetuation of the problem. So the concepts can also be heard, or rather, the intention of the concepts is to point at a function that is happening, and point at that function as being a problematic way of functioning, or that function being problematic, and describing certain dynamics as to why it is in place and why it continues to happen, and describes what needs to be registered in the environment or in daily life in order to start seeing what would be described as how things really are, how things really work, in order for that thinking to become undermined. The thinking of doership and attachment to outcome, meaning I as a separate self, that's what the psychological me believes itself to be, and it's just a belief system, it's just an idea that is lodged and continues to function. The new information hopefully highlights why that is in place, and shows that it is based on seeing life a certain way and seeing itself a certain way, whereas in fact it's not. The identity is not the doer, and the purpose of life is not to get somewhere, and specifically happiness, for the human being is not to be found in that strategy, in that movement, that direction. In fact, that strategy, that movement, that entity is in fact the unhappiness in life. So the concepts are there to point out certain dynamics that can be seen now, and can undermine that thinking. So as I said, if the thinking itself grabs hold of the concept and does the seeking, then the suffering is actually going to increase, which may not be an ultimate problem, because at some point awareness in the working mind, the intellect, might see the fact that the doership thinking has hijacked even spiritual concepts and is running with those much as it ran with many other outcomes and ideas prior to coming across spiritual concepts and ideas in life. So basically the same principle, just feeding off different food, in a sense. And so that can even be seen. And at any moment, that's an opportunity. In fact, sometimes when the suffering gets more and more intense, it is when it gets seen for what it is. And what sees it is not the suffering itself. What sees it is that which is aware of the suffering. So, to counter this potential problem where the doership idea, the identity, which is a mind-based thing, hears mind-based concepts that are computable, in order to avoid that, we're often not given concepts. Or at least not given concepts that are logic concepts that sort of ask for some sort of deduction to happen. So the notion that you are formless awareness, that's a concept. But it's a very different concept to saying suffering is the movement of is a movement of thought, a very specific type of thought, and the root of that thought is the belief in doership and attachment to outcome. And so peace of mind is the stopping of that thinking, or the ending of that thinking. Now, that to the doership will be heard as, oh, you are telling me to stop thinking, to stop doing that type of thinking. Okay, I'll do my best to stop doing that type of thinking by doing the end of thinking. So it's a bit of a problem when it gets heard by the doer that has always believed it needs to make the most of what it's been given as the doer to get an outcome. So because that description that says suffering is or peace of mind, happiness for the human being is the end of suffering, it will be heard by the doer, unless it's qualified enough in the delivery of it, it will be heard as something for the doer to do. So spiritual teachings actually will come from a different angle sometimes and say, look, there's nothing to do. What you are is formless awareness. What you are is the awareness in which everything happens. Be that. The thinking is an object, a movement within the awareness, and it is awareness that recognizes the thinking, sees the thinking as an object. It is awareness that is aware of the table. It is awareness that is aware of the trees. It is awareness that is aware of the body. It's not the body aware of the tree, but rather awareness aware of the body and aware of the tree. The deeply ingrained belief of personal doership has created the impression that what we are is the body, the subject that is aware of all of the objects. So, how does this identification with the body and identification as the thinker get dislodged? And what I'm talking about, where we are, descriptions are given, concepts are given that will describe our nature, describe what we are and describe what we're not. So, for example, you are awareness, you are not the body. Now, bring your attention to the present moment. Because one of the things that isn't happening when thinking is repetitive and compulsive and intense, and where there is a strong identification with thinking, which means there is the feeling in the experience that I am the thinking, or I am the thinker of the thoughts. And if the thoughts are uncomfortable, it's I am uncomfortable. That is the experience and the feeling. And that's what makes life most unacceptable, most uncomfortable, is the feeling that my life is so, my life as a human being is so uncomfortable because of all of this thinking that's happening. So let's bring our attention to the present moment, because when that thinking is happening, there isn't attention on the present moment. There is attention on a particular object of the present moment, which is the thinking. And because that attention is what we could call identified, which means feeling like that's what I am, that's what the experience largely feels like. So let's look at what life is. Let's become present with life. Because as I said, that's what isn't happening when the thinking is most intense and uncomfortable. So if we can start to get a glimpse of what presence is, if the present moment is described in a way that allows the whole present moment to be seen as a singular experience instead of a whole lot of separate objects seen by a subject body, which is what tends to be our experience of life, and then therefore tends to force an identification with particular objects to happen. And when there is identification with particular objects happening, then the sense of self is highly flavored by the object that is being identified with, which tends to be thoughts about being the body, and then thoughts about being the body that doesn't have things that it feels it needs to have. Thoughts about being the body, being the person, and regretting things that it did in the past. So let's look at exploring what the present moment is in such a way that maybe allows a returning back to the present moment to happen more regularly in the next week than it might happen otherwise. And how I'd like to do that is by pointing out that there is an experience in each moment. And the experience is not an experience that the human body is having, although usually the experience is an experience that says this is an experience that the human body is having. So there is an experience, and the experience will be and can be whatever the experience is. However it is designed, it will be experienced. And we don't design the experience, it is here. So by and large we can say it's an experience of daily life, an experience of being a person in a world of form. That's what the experience consistently tends to arise as for most of us. And if we keep knowing life as it appears to be represented within the experience, then that is, I guess, one of the descriptions of what separation is, where we know life as a whole lot of separate objects recognized by a body that feels like the subject, that is aware of those objects. And that is a world of form. So let's talk about life, this world of form, not as an actual world of form, but as an experience of a world of form. And this delivery of concepts is not really a delivery for you to think about and work out in your head, but I'm talking about the experience here. So bring attention to the experience here. That means bring attention primarily. The biggest part of the experience in every moment is the visual aspect of the experience. So to the extent that you are aware of the visual aspects of the experience, means that when I say to the extent, whenever you are particularly focused on the visual aspect of the experience, which, I don't know, let's take a guess, makes up 70 or 80% of the experience, then less thinking is happening. And as soon as we lose touch with the experience, we lose touch with being present with the experience in the present moment, more attention goes off into thinking, and then the prevalent component of the experience is the thinking. So if we can bring attention, if attention comes onto the fact that there is always an experience of, and what I mean by experience means, well, there is always an experience. How do we know there's an experience? We need to focus on the absence of experience as a contrast to what we mean by experience. I don't really mean experience in the sense that, if you go for a bungee jump or a skydive, you can go, oh, that was an amazing experience. Because that sort of tends to mean that experiences are those abnormal experiences that we can have, or have a great meal and go, oh, that was a fantastic experience, tasting all those different wines, or whatever. I mean experience in a much more fundamental way, which means whenever you are in life, if you're in the kitchen cutting carrots, the kitchen and the carrots and the hand and the knife cutting the carrots is the experience. If you go outside and there are clouds and birds and sunshine and wind and trees and other people, that is the experience. The whole thing, it's a multi-layered sensory experience. So let's now look at the absence of experience. So at night, when we go into what we can call deep sleep, so not the dream state, because essentially the dream state still has experience in it. The dream is the experience in that moment. So when the dream comes to an end, and let's assume that deep sleep is the absence of the daily life experience. So there are no trees, there are no cars, there's no bedroom, there's no person, there's no thinking, there's no emotions. There's none of the componentry of experience is there in deep sleep. So deep sleep is the absence of life. If we say, what is daily life? Daily life is experience. So if daily life is experience and deep sleep is no experience, then we can say in deep sleep there is no life experience, no experience. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that life, essentially, what we've always known as my life or daily life, is actually the experience of life. And our experience of life always happens in what is at the time the present moment. In some present moments, one of the componentry of the experience is memory, and memory creates the impression by putting in an object of thought, a thought object that has sort of a residual memory or residual image. Actually, it's just an image in the present moment, but it appears like it is and it's labeled in a certain way that says this is something that was experienced previously. And really, when you look at the experience in the moment, you see that a memory is really just a component of the present moment. And if whatever is creating this experience, in theory, you say, well, I don't know that it can't insert a memory that maybe never happened. Now, I'm not saying that we should assume that memory never happened, because we don't really know whether memory happened or not. In fact, we have to live our life. We do live our life as if our memories are more or less a reflection of what happened before. But for the purpose of coming to understand experience, what is experience? To understand life, daily life, which is there in order to bring us to a different appreciation, which hopefully will bring a movement outside of identification with a particular object, which hopefully we can see as an object of experience rather than the true subject. So that's really the purpose of describing life this way, is for a specific reason. So life is the present moment experience. Deep sleep is the absence of experience. There's no one there having an experience, or there are no objects of experience in deep sleep. This contrast of using deep sleep as essentially like frames in our life experience that are blank frames, essentially, or gaps in between life experience. So there is daily life, and then there's a gap of no daily life. Now, we tend not to think about deep sleep with much interest. And if we don't think about deep sleep, it's not really thinking about deep sleep, it's about putting it into the time frame or into our view of life, such that it provides us with an understanding that there is a gap where there is no experience. If we don't do that, all we really know is experience. And And if we only know experience, and it's consistently there, it gets taken to be reality. It gets, we assume it to be unchanging. If a cup, a mug, a coffee mug just was there, and we're looking at it, and let's say it's there every day on the kitchen counter, it never moves. Let's say it's an ornamental mug, and it's been there for years. It's consistently there, and so we have no reason to doubt that it's real. If you're looking at the mug and suddenly it vanishes, and then 10 seconds later it comes back, you now have to relate to that differently. You at least have to give it some thought and say, hey, the mug vanished for 10 seconds and now it's back, and then it vanishes again, and then it comes back. So because you've never experienced it as vanishing and then coming back, you've got a fixed idea about it. And you have no reason to think of it any other way, because it's only ever presented one way, always there. Now, life, our experience of life, is often, at least once a day, not there. And we may never have given that any thought. Which really means that we have a mug that is vanishing for 10 seconds, and our brain is eliminating the recognition of the mug vanishing and creating appreciation of the mug, let's say, always being there. When in fact, let's say it vanishes for 10 seconds every hour. And instead of allowing us to register this, the brain sort of cuts out the bit where it's not there and makes it appear one way or another, like in terms of our appreciation, as if it's always there. This appreciation of life as experience, and experience so this appreciation of life as an experience is fundamental to the change that is, or it is a fundamental part of the change that needs to happen in order for us to come to know ourselves differently. What we've also done is, because we haven't appreciated that daily life is experience, we have taken the quality of the experience. And so what I mean by quality is that the sense of touch, for example. So there is a feeling in the experience, a tactile feeling of touch. And because of, I guess, our appreciation of what's real and what's not real, or how we have defined things as real and not real, is, well, if we can touch something, if we can confirm it by confirming it by touching it, then it's real. Whereas experience, especially the life experience, which is essentially a multi-sensory experience, means that the sense of touch is a layer or an aspect of experience that gives the impression of a subject touching an object. That is the experience. That is how the experience is designed to be. Now, that doesn't mean that because we experience something, it's real. What it is if we experience it, we have to say it is the experience. So now let's introduce dreams as an in-between experience between deep sleep, which is no experience, daily life, which is daily life experience, which I'm saying is really just experience, and then dream state, which allows us to understand how experience can create the impression of something, and from within the experience it will feel very real, and yet with a dream we have the benefit of coming outside the dream, waking up from the dream, and then being able to remember the dream. And so that's a very useful contrast to have as well. Why is it a useful contrast? Because it allows us to appreciate the nature of experience, and in particular how experience, which really means it has no form to it. If we're talking about the form component of experience, we say, well, there really is no tree. If you have a dream at night and there's a tree in the dream, the main character can be up there touching the tree and saying, wow, this tree is so solid and rugged, and I can imagine if this tree fell over, it would weigh, I don't know, 50 tons. So within the dream, the tree is solid and it has mass, and it's going to weigh a lot of, it's going to be heavy. That's the experience. And if the person bumped the dream character, what we could call the person in the dream, bumped their head against the tree, they would the sensation would be of two physical objects bumping up against each other. And so if you told the dream character, if another dream character came up to the dream character and said, do you realize that that tree and your head bumping into the tree is an experience, and that there isn't really a objectively real tree? So the character in the dream that is being told this might find it very hard to understand what is being said, especially if it's never had an experience that it can look at and realize how something that isn't objectively real can feel a very particular way. So even if the dream character has had its own dreams of worlds that when it wakes up from those worlds back into the dream, it realizes are not real, unless it specifically thinks about them. If someone comes up and says, this experience you're having of your head bumping into the tree is not of two objects, they really have no independent existence. The dream character may have, might say, I really don't understand what you're talking about. When the dream collapses and the dream character collapses and the tree collapses, it's not there anymore because the dream is over, because the person that was having the dream wakes up. The person can remember the dream. It's like, wow, that was a very vivid dream, and I remember bumping my head against the tree and it hurt. And I can remember that there was a thud sound in the dream, and it felt very much like one object, solid form, was hitting another solid form. And yet you can see that there is no tree and no head that really exists except as an experience within consciousness. So from within the experience experience will feel a particular way. But it doesn't at all mean that experience is a representation of truth. Experience is not at all necessarily a representation of reality. So we have another set of experiences that we can investigate, two other types that we can investigate that start to show us the fact that experience doesn't necessarily represent reality. One of them is where we might be sure about what someone is saying, for example, where we've interpreted what someone is saying a certain way. And then if we listen to a recording, we might realize that they said something different. And yet it was experienced the way it was experienced. Whereas we have the recording, and the recording says, oh, well, but actually what was said was something different. Another is if we've taken some sort of substance that has an effect on the brain, you can see that maybe some additional objects get added into the experience. Or the experience gets fuzzy or mixed up. And so let's say pixies get added into the experience. Well, we could assume that, oh, now I'm seeing reality and before I didn't see the pixies. Or you could say, wow, the experience now is such that it's got additional components to it. Now, either way, you can either say that if the pixies really exist before they weren't seen, so you can say that the experience is not a reflection of truth, or if the pixies don't really exist but they're added in, once again you can say what I'm experiencing is not a reflection of truth. Because life is so consistently one way, and we don't tend to have these abnormal experiences often, or if we do, we don't tend to think about them in this way, and so some of the implications and insights that can come don't happen. Because that's the case and life is so consistent, we can form a certain relationship to life. And that relationship is very often the relationship of being the person that is aware of an objectively real world. Now, I'm not exactly saying that we will end up living as if life is not real. That's not really the point of all of this. We may, in fact, after exploring the nature of daily life as experience, still end up living as if life is real, as if the tree has real form and substance, because in practical terms it does. You know, realizing that life is an experience doesn't then mean that the body can walk through the tree. In practical terms, the tree is going to be a physical obstacle to the body. However, the realization that I'm pointing at is a realization that can coexist and change something, something particularly linked to the sense of self. And the sense of self is what determines how we experience ourselves. And suffering is very much linked to our experience of ourself, our sense of self. So going back to what the point of all of this is that often we find ourselves dragged into thinking with no capacity to have a different perspective on the thoughts. And when there is no capacity to have a different perspective on the thoughts, we find that our perspective is one of being heavily identified with the thoughts. The thoughts are uncomfortable. They tend to be habitual and have a very strong momentum to them, which means we can get lost and know ourselves as the thinking and the thoughts for extended times. So coming to see life as always an experience made up of many layers. The first layer, and you can look at this as maybe a piece of plastic with some of the components of the experience on it. So the first layer is one of the layers of the experience, and I don't have to go in any particular order. It's really just to try and show this. And the visual layer is the first layer of the component, the first layer of the experience. All of the visual objects. The next layer might be sounds that are overlaid on top of the layer of visual perception. So then we have sound perception. Then you have the layer of touch overlaid. So now there's 3 layers of the experience. Then we have the layer of thought, thinking, the layer of feelings, the layer of emotions, another layer of thought, let's call that the working mind, and the first layer of thought is the thinking mind. The layer of the sense of beingness, the sense of existence. Let's put that in as the very first layer, actually, before the visual perceptions. And so all of these layers essentially get squashed together to create the overall experience. That's all of the senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, taste. And then the thinking mind, the working mind, a layer of perception, of feelings, emotions, and the sense of being is a bit different to these other layers, but let's treat the sense of being, or I am, as the very first layer. It's a quasi-layer. It's part of the objects, but a very special, unique object, the primary object of beingness. Now, in order for all of these objects, which are these layers of objects, and each layer is continually changing, and the mix of all the layers in each moment is the present moment experience that is continually changing. And then there must be awareness of the content of experience. So awareness of the visual field, awareness of the sounds, awareness of the taste and smell and touch, which are really all objects of experience which we've tried to distinguish from each other by saying there's these different layers to the experience. There has to be awareness of the experience. And awareness is not of the body. The body is part of the layers of the experience. So the body makes up part of the visual component, just like the lamp and the tree. When we're looking at the wall and the other people in the room, the bookcase, the window, all of those are sections of the visual layer. And the body is part of that. And so it's not a whole lot of separate objects. The visual layer is all of the visual component of the present moment, including the visuals of the body. And the sound layer is the sound of the birds, the sound of the cars and the dog, and in this case, the sound of voice. Someone else's voice or your own voice. What we call my own voice. So often what happens is the body is assumed to be the subject, so it is excluded from what we know as experience. So if I'm talking about the visual layers of experience, the normal standpoint would be to look at the visuals from the perspective of the body and say, oh yeah, I see the visual component of the experience. What that's doing is creating a separation that doesn't really exist, and thinking that the subject is the body. Whereas what I'm trying to point at is the body is an object of experience. So the body is not aware. The body is an object, or part of one of the layers of experience, the visual object layer. Now, thinking is also an object in the present moment experience. Feelings are an object in the present moment experience. Physical pain is part of the tactile or part of the feeling layer of experience, depending on its nuance. All of that is the momentary experience. So you can look at the momentary experience, if we use a metaphor. The metaphor is a slideshow of photos that has been set up, and let's say there's 100 photos in the slideshow. It's a PowerPoint type slideshow. And each photo is up for a specified period of time. Let's say 3 seconds, then flicks on to the next photo, 5 seconds, and then the next photo is up for 2 seconds, the next one's up for 10 seconds. And so there's this progression of photos, and they're all there, and the present photo is the one that is on the screen. So if there is thinking, and it's thinking that is uncomfortable, let's say blame, then that is a component, a layer of the current momentary experience of life. And in that momentary experience, the body will be there, and it will be laid out such that the thought seems like it is linked to the body. So the experience is the body is thinking, and that thinking is blame. And that is destiny. That is like the photo that is up at that point in time. And it's there for as long as it's up. And so the metaphor of a photo is helpful because it's sort of, we all know a photo slideshow. It's not perfect because a photo is really just a visual image, whereas what obviously the daily life experience is multi-sensory, so it's got many more layers than just a photo. But if you imagine a photo, it becomes easy to understand, oh, that's destiny, that the photo is there, and it will be there for as long as it's there, and then it will change to the next photo. And so our experience of life is exactly that. It is the experience appearing exactly as the experience is designed to appear. So that when we're aware of the photo, we are aware of an object that we didn't create. Let's say you walk into the cinema and then the photo slideshow starts happening and you experience the photos as they present themselves. And so life experience is essentially that, a creation, and let's say created by Source or God, and there is that experience is experienced in life. So if there is a moment of life that is full of suffering, that is the experience. Now, what is really important is in this exploration, is to realize that the body is an object. And yet, there is awareness of all of the objects. And what you are, for all intensive purposes within this exploration, what you are is not an object. What you are is the formless awareness that recognizes the present moment experience, that is aware of the present moment experience exactly the way it is, meaning exactly the way it has been created. So life is either one big changing experience, or you could say a series of momentary experiences, one moment after the next, after the next, after the next. And it's very clear that these moments, one after the next, tie together to create the impression of time and space and causality. That's what this experience of life is, and how it's being created, and how it will be experienced. Within that experience of life, there can be a shift, a change, where we start experiencing life from the perspective of being this formless awareness that is aware of the present moment experience. Now, if you're listening to my words too much, trying to understand what I'm saying, you might be missing the fact that I'm talking about the present moment experience. That's all I've been talking about today, is describing the present moment. So come down to the be aware of the present moment, which, for all intents and purposes, if you can, stick to the visual and sound objects are the ones that are most prevalent in the life experience. There's always visual components. To bring your attention to the wall, to the table, and that basically is presence. Allow the body to be an object amongst all other visual objects. And I refer to the body as a visual object, and it might imply that I'm saying the body is a visual object separate from the lamp, which is another visual object. But really, I'm trying to portray the visual layer as one, almost like, let's see, if we had a big poster, a big photo printed on a big piece of sticky plastic, and it was designed in a way where you can start off at one corner of the room and put it on like wallpaper, and it's one big image of all the visual objects in the room. So That would be the visual layer, and it's one single piece of wallpaper, and there may be lots of what would seem like separate objects, but once you imagine it as a big piece of wallpaper, you see, oh, they're not really separate. It's a layer. And so all of the visual objects in the current life experience can be seen as one layer, and then the sound as another layer, and then eventually maybe blend all of these different sense perceptions that I'm describing as separate layers, glue them together so that it just becomes one cohesive, single, multisensory experience, including not only multisensory but thoughts and emotions and feelings. And awareness, formless awareness, has to be there in order for that experience to be known. So whenever there is the experience of daily life, awareness is the background. Awareness is that which is unchanging. The content of the experience is changing. Your thinking is changing. The words, the sound objects are changing. Awareness is that which is always present, aware of the changing experience. And what you are is not the body. What you are is that which is aware of the body. The body is part of the objects of experience. So once again, it's very easy to get dragged up into thinking and try and imagine what I'm saying. Come back down into the experience and be that which is aware. And that is not the body. Be that which is aware of the body. The body arises inside that which we are, along with the rest of the present moment experience. So Nisargadatta has said that we start off thinking that we are a body walking around inside an objective world, only to realize that the whole world arises inside what we are. This really isn't something to think about. It's something to be embodied. And it's embodied by dropping backwards out of thinking to be that which is aware of the thinking. Awareness doesn't know how to think. Awareness doesn't know how to say but. Awareness is aware of the thinking that says but. Awareness is not able to have expectations. Awareness has no form. And it takes no effort to be that which you are. Being awareness doesn't require you to be aware. It doesn't require you to do awareness. Awareness is, by default, aware of the present moment experience that is life. And the present moment experience that is arising within that which is aware, that which you are. The present moment experience, the life content, is not separate from the awareness that is aware of it. If the content was separate from awareness, meaning if the content was outside of awareness, then that content wouldn't be part of the present moment experience. So let's imagine life as we know it, where if we hear a dog barking, if we hear there is barking, we say, okay, there is a dog. Now, if that bark was outside of awareness, it would cease to be in the experience. So what that says is that the sound is heard because it is on that layer of sound objects that is contained within the field of awareness. So because we have known ourselves to be the body object, we relate to the sound as outside of us. That is how we know experience or life, when we believe that, and when we feel like we are a body walking around inside of life. So Nisargadatta reminded us, we start off feeling like we are a body inside of an objective world, only to realize that the whole objective world arises inside what we are. So it's a shift of identity from believing ourselves to be what is actually just an object, to knowing ourselves to be the awareness in which all objects exist. So the barking dog, from one perspective, is a bark outside of what I am. From another perspective, the perspective of knowing yourself as formless awareness, the bark arises within what you are. And this is not at all meant to be an intellectual understanding or knowing. Someone might try and figure it out in their head and say, oh yes, I get what you mean intellectually. This is available to us directly. But it requires a challenging of the notion that what I am is an object. And in fact, when we identify with an object, in that moment it doesn't feel like the object is an object. It then becomes sensed that the object is a subject. So what that means is when we feel that we are the body feels like the body is what is aware of the other objects. We go through life and the experience is created such that it feels like the body is aware of the books, the body is aware of the table, the body is aware of the other person. And that is an experience that is designed such that an object appears to be the subject. So in investigating life experience, it is most important to realize that what we have always known ourselves as is really part of the objective, the objects of experience. Part of the visual layer, part of the touch layer, part of the sound layer, part of the thought layer. That might lead to a qualitative shift in the nature of how the experience is experienced. A sense, oh, what I am is that in which the whole experience arises. What I am is the formless awareness, which is a feeling, a sense. It's experiential, and it requires a dropping back. Not that you do, but a dropping back that happens when attention comes to the present moment experience and appreciates the objects of experience as not what I am. So the practice of neti, which really means not this and not that, is a practice where we are invited to understand that whatever there is awareness of, we can't be that. And so the practice will be handed over in a way such that you are invited to check out all the objects of perception, the visual objects, and say, oh, I can see the lamp, or there is seeing of the lamp, I am not that. There is seeing of the other person, I am not that. There is seeing of the hand, I am not that. There is seeing, and the seeing I'm talking about is not visual seeing, it is awareness. There is the seeing of the sound of voice, I am not that. There is the seeing of feelings. So remember, seeing refers to a seeing beyond sight, but more of an awareness. I am not that. I am not the sounds. I am not the feelings. I am not the emotions. Anything that can be, there can be awareness of, I am not that. Not this, not that. And as we start coming to the objects of awareness that we have previously known to be what I am, primarily the body and the feelings, the emotions and the thoughts. Not this, not that. What we end up being is what is left, that in which the experience arises. And this is a movement that, I guess, a movement that has atrophied, this dropping back into being that which is aware. And the more often there is a resting there, the more it's appreciated that life is an ever-changing, transient experience. As we appreciate the experience of life more closely, we'll see that the leaves blowing in the wind, the movement of a tree, is the continuous changing of the experience. That's what movement is. Sound, which is the sound of a sentence, is really if we look at sound as a wave, the different sound is basically shown by sound waves oscillating, which means the sound is in continuous flux. The experience is always in motion on every single level. So even the objects of experience that seem to be fairly static, like a rock that doesn't move, there hopefully is an appreciation that on a subatomic level there is change, and those atoms are really just objects of experience. So the whole object, the whole experience is continually being renewed, like the photos in the slideshow that appear and are replaced by another photo, and then another photo, and then another photo. And that is the life experience. And if there isn't attention brought to the nature of experience, what we will never know is the awareness that is aware and one with the experience. So I'm describing the objects of experience as, in terms of the conceptual delivery, as separate from the awareness, because I'm saying there are these layers of objects: the visual objects, the sound objects, the taste objects, the smell objects, the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings. Then I'm saying let's squash them together. So now there's not 7 layers, they've been squashed into one singular experience. And at first we're describing it as awareness is that which is aware of the changing objects. Awareness is that which is unchanging. So once again, it creates an impression of awareness and the objects of awareness. And in fact, we need to go through the changing qualitative nature of experience in that way, where at first a shift will be, I am the formless awareness that is unchanging, and the content is continually changing. And so when I say I am, it's the body is saying I am, but the realization, when we're not talking, if we're just being present with the present moment experience, there won't even be the thought I am awareness. There will just be the beingness of just being awareness. Now that being awareness doesn't happen if we are identified with being the thinking that's saying, I just don't get it. I don't know what you mean. I've tried to be awareness. So then we go, okay, let me try again. Let me do it. That's still it's not about trying to be awareness. I'm describing life as a present moment experience, and describing the body as not being the subject. Awareness is the subject. What you are is the subject. The body is the object. The whole experience of life arises inside what you are, is made of what you are, is not separate from what you are. Many times a day, there is the potential opportunity to just be formless awareness in which everything arises. Every time there is a movement to being that, that is presence prior to thinking. That is the falling away of being the thinker to being that which we fundamentally are. And don't expect it to be anything particularly impressive. At first, it can be amazingly surprising to come to know yourself as formless awareness, where there is a stillness, a quietness, because that's the only time that we will know ourselves as formless awareness, is when there has been a falling out, falling backwards out of the objects, primarily of thinking. That's what keeps us identified, is when we are identified as thinking, trying to do something, trying to do the becoming of awareness. And it's not, it's the stopping. Just be. Be that which is aware of the present moment experience. So it can be surprising to know oneself as being that which is aware of the body and not the body. And we might find ourselves dropping into that, and maybe only for 5 or 10 seconds at a time. It might also be that we sort of drop there and think, well, this isn't, it's different, but surely this can't be what it's all about, because I'm not feeling any great bliss maybe, or like this is the most valuable thing in the universe. And it's strengthening a muscle, and as that muscle is strengthened, as life can be appreciated from this perspective, or as there is a resting in this perspective, a lot of the habitual thinking that really is the problem can start to be seen for what it is. From this place of being, the awareness in which everything arises, the thinking may arise in a way where it's there but it doesn't stick. Where it's seen to be an object arising and doing its thing and then fading away, replaced by more thinking. And at times we'll find that presence with the present moment experience is presence with an experience that includes much less thinking. And that in itself really can still not seem to be that significant. Because there is another movement after that in a sense integrates what has happened in this phase that I'm talking about, integrates it into in a way that makes that valuable, makes it feel and allows it to be appreciated as that which we are really looking for. So it's different when it gets integrated. It is different to just being formless awareness, witnessing life. Because the truth is that there's a great relief from dropping into this beingness and realizing I am that which is, in a way, outside of the flow of life, outside of the thinking and the emotions and the suffering. And that means that the suffering, if it still arises, has much less intensity to it. It's not who you are. So there is a great relief from knowing yourself as the awareness in which everything arises. There is a detachment, not in a bad way, in a where the obsessive identification that was making us feel like the suffering, feel like the thinking, that has loosened. But after a while, if we think it's just about resting in that being, formless awareness, if that becomes the objective, there starts to be a sense that something is missing. Because we say, this can't be it. In a way, there's a frustration that we get drawn out of that. And if we think that enlightenment is being that, then we might think, oh, I shouldn't be drawn out of that. But maybe we need to get drawn out of it to go into the next phase of integration. However, we can't go into the next phase of integration until we are grounded in that appreciation of what we truly are. So there'll be some people that hear me talk about what's after that, and they're suddenly not interested in what I've just spent the whole satsang talking about, because they just want, the final outcome, which is the doer attached to pleasure, attached to outcomes. And there's a progression. So the advice that Nisargadatta's teaching gives essentially is, you are that, abide as that. Abide as I am. But let's not bring I am into it, because that's a little different to what I've been talking about. But essentially, I am and awareness are two aspects of your true nature. So Nisargadatta's primary teaching is, you are not the body, you are awareness or consciousness. At different points he used different words in the teaching, but let's just stick with awareness. You are not the body, you are awareness. Abide as that. Rest as that. Keep coming back to being that. And the being of awareness can only happen if one is not being the thinking. Awareness doesn't think. Awareness can't think. Awareness can be aware of the thinking. Awareness doesn't speak. And if our structure is such that the identification with thoughts and objects is strong, this being awareness is not going to happen just like that necessarily. However, I hope that the steps that we've spoken about today, where we start to appreciate life as experience, can help break those bonds that keep us identified with an object. I feel that without appreciating what we know as daily life as being an experience in the moment, so that means we need to understand, what does experience in the moment means? It means that the tree is not independently real for the purpose of this exploration. The tree is an object of experience that is changing each moment. The whole experience is always changing. The wall and even time and space are not real. So someone asked me yesterday, Ramesh, he said the quote I think was, said, the simple reality is that all of life came into existence in an instant before time. So the question was, what does that mean? All of life, so from the beginning of time to the end of time, or all of the universe, was created in an instant before time. So what that means is that time itself is illusory. Time is part of the experience. It means that in deep sleep, when the experience is not there, there is, for all in practical, or for all intents and purposes, time ceases to exist. There are no objects in relation to each other and no subject in relation to the objects to create the impression of time. And in order for space to exist, time needs to exist. So time and space coexist together. You can't have one without the other. This is why time-space is, or space-time, is referred to as a variable, a component in physics. One of the fundamental variables is space-time. And space-time is not space and time, but it's space-time as one unit. Is that if we have space, we need time to move through space. And if there's no time, which means like a snapshot, like on pause, so no time, then there's no space. Space comes into existence once time starts. And all of space and time is contained in the experience. This is really relevant to peace of mind in daily living. An appreciation of life as an experience, an appreciation of what we truly are, what our essence is, the awareness that is aware of all of time and space as it presents in the present moment. So don't expect that you'll know yourself as awareness that was aware of the Big Bang and aware of the end of the world. Time and space exists as components of the present moment. So to know yourself as formless awareness, aware of the whole experience, including the framework of time and space, in the end becomes very significant for one purpose only, and that is to be able to live life as the human being, free of the load of guilt and blame and pride, worry and expectation. And for as long as there is this strong identification with the body as being what I am, exclusively what I am, so knowing myself as the subject that has physical form and that thinks and that has emotions, there will always be identification with being that and suffering in the form of guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation, because of the ingrained belief within that identification that I am the one that makes the speaking happen, I am the one that makes my suffering happen, I am the one that makes the outcomes happen, and that what I am requires outcomes in the future to be happy. All of that is contained in the identification with form, and therefore the suffering exists. Knowing life as a happening, an experience, an unfolding in consciousness allows for that identification with form to loosen, and therefore allows the deeply ingrained beliefs of self, the beliefs that what I am is a physical entity requiring outcomes to be complete, can also loosen. And as that happens, the suffering is witnessed as an object within consciousness, an object within the experience of life. And in time, the suffering dissolves such that it is no longer an object to be witnessed. Okay, so we'll just take a few questions. Hello, Luca. Just 1 minute. We'll just... Okay, go ahead, Luca.
Hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I wanted to talk about unknowing because I had this interval of a peace of mind, and it became very clear that nothing can be known, like absolutely nothing can be known. Not the table, not the chair, nothing. But at the same time, you could also, you don't lose the ability to use concepts because otherwise you wouldn't be able to function. So it's kind of a not knowing, but at the same time you can function with concepts that kind of relate to the unknowing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like you just talk about that for me.
Yeah, great. See, the truth is this notion of I don't know is very useful, and as you're pointing out, it's not an absolute truth either. Because, so what does that mean? Why is it very useful? Firstly, it's very useful because our thinking, especially the suffering thinking, has ingrained in it the assumption that the thinking knows. The assumption is the thinking knows that it is the doer, for example, and that it needs happiness, it needs a soulmate, it needs, a promotion to be happy. So that's what the thinking thinks, and we find the relationship to it for a large part of our life is this is correct. I absolutely know that this is what I need in order to be happy. The same thing is I absolutely know that I have to hate the other because they hurt me and they shouldn't have hurt me. And so what we assume is how life is, and we know it for sure, turns out down the track to be not so spot on, wasn't that accurate. We might start to see, oh, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. What I thought was his doing, I see as part of life unfolding. We also get to see that we might have all sorts of stories about why the person did something to us. And then we find out that it wasn't quite as we imagined. They didn't call us back because the message wasn't delivered, let's say. And we thought that they didn't call us back because they were rude and they don't like us and I'm not good enough. And, that can be the story in our head. And then we realize, oh, I thought I knew, and in fact I got it completely wrong. So the truth is, we have very little idea about what life is. So one of the tools that are used in teachings, because all of this I do know is really essentially what belief is, where we take something that is relative, our perception of life, and turn it into I know this is how it is, which is turning it into absolute, which is, turning a concept into a belief, where we treat the concept as absolute truth. A teaching will come in, and I think, what's her name? I think Byron Katie sort of uses this as the main part of her teaching. She goes, how do you know that that's true? As her suggestion to anything you're thinking, it's, do you know that that's true? And obviously I'm guessing that before that she goes through pointing out how we make so many mistakes, and so the encouragement is always ask yourself, is it true? And hopefully we'll be trained at a certain point to understand it's probably not true, or not it's probably not true, it isn't true because I can't know anything absolutely, because my perceptions are relative, the way I process things is relative, the information I have is relative. So that means that when we get into a story of suffering, we can start to realize that we're treating all of our conclusions and assumptions as true, and this is a true can come in and drop us out of the thinking, where we say, oh, I don't know that it's true, and then we see that thinking as an error, essentially, or not the truth. So it might help us drop into that which we are. Right? So that's the benefit of I don't know. It essentially can cut off the suffering, or cut off our involvement with suffering, and allow us to drop into a place of peace or distance from the suffering thinking. You with me so far?
Sense.
Yep. So then, if we come to believe or see, I don't know anything, I can't know anything, we might actually go around then saying, the truth is I don't know anything. Because we've seen something, and that it's a great insight. Where I say it's not entirely true that I don't know anything is that if we really believed that to the core, and actually I'm not suggesting that we need to believe it to the core, because if we believed it to the core, we'd stop being able to function. So what we need to and this is the nuance I'd like to talk about, which is part of your the important part of your question is this, I think, is we might think that we realize and know that I can't know anything, and we might turn that into an absolute truth, which is not really a correct representation of how we're functioning. Because even given that we have realized on some level, which is the right level, but we need to see that there are, so we've realized on some level that I don't know anything. And yet, in practice, we continue to function as if we know some things. Now, how to reconcile this? So that means that, we don't try and open the front door with a banana. And so if we don't know anything, then how do we know to use a key for the front door? If we really don't know, you try opening the door with a banana, but you don't. And you put the key in, you turn the door, and the door opens first time, every time. So you obviously know something. And so it comes down to understanding what I don't know means. So there is a role for relative truth or relative knowing. And what that means is we can know things such that they are useful, or I know something enough for it to be useful knowledge. However, let's not get confused and think that what I know that is useful. So, for example, I'd say I have lots of concepts. I have the concept of how to make a soft-boiled egg the way I like it. And so, for me, it's 5.5 minutes in the water from the time the water boils, put the egg in, 5.5 minutes, take it out, and I have to quench it under cold water. Someone else says, no, I only put it in for 3 minutes. And then we realize they put it in for 3 minutes, but they don't quench it after in cold water, which means it keeps cooking for another few minutes while it's in the egg, in the shell. Someone else says, well, I put it in for 8 minutes, but you realize they put it in when the water is not boiling. So all of these things are relative concepts or relative information, and they're good enough to get the job done. So for us to say, I don't know anything, in fact, you have to go through a period. This is why the process is a process. There's a period where the teaching is going to tell you, you don't know anything. You think you know stuff, and you don't know anything, and you can't ever know anything. You have to come to the realization that you don't know anything. And when you start seeing it, every time the suffering kicks in, which says, I do know, I know what I need, I know what I didn't get, I know that life isn't working out well. Whereas, we'll get told, it seems like it's not working out, and you're convinced it's not working out, and then you find that that bad outcome in the moment turns into something very good. So you don't really know, or you're not seeing it correctly. So at some point we have this great insight, I don't know anything. And it's a great relief. I don't need to know anything. In fact, not knowing is a place of surrender. And so there is great freedom in coming to understand you don't know. But at some point, we might have this question, but I still keep opening the door with the key and it works, etc., etc. So the then holding those things is to see that there is relative information that is good enough to help us with certain tasks, and we still need to, in order to function, we have to have that information, and we do have that information, and we hold it as relative to truth, because if we really didn't know anything on a complete, total level on all layers, we just simply wouldn't be able to function, because we would be like babies every day. And we're not, and thankfully. And so we know enough about the laws of physics to build very big buildings that are amazing in terms of, the developments that we have. And yet, from a different perspective, all those laws won't hold true from a different relative point of view. Let's say outside of the manifestation, if there is an outside of the manifestation, the laws of within the manifestation won't be, they're not absolute. So that's my take on it all.
Really clear. Makes it clear to me that there can't be any truth.
Except for a relative truth. Which
Absolutely.
Which is
I'm talking about absolute.
Yeah. Which is, someone would say, well, and I've said it to myself before, that the word relative truth is an oxymoron. Because, from one definition of truth, truth is truth is truth is truth. It's got nothing to do with relativeness. In fact, relativeness is the opposite of truth. So the idea of a relative truth is an oxymoron from one point of view. However, our thinking can put that in context, and then we can come up with the notion of relative truth within a certain context, what I just described. So yes, in the context you were using the word truth, you're correct. And I often say, when someone says, I'm searching for the truth, well, I say, well, good luck, there isn't any. Well, none that you'll know anyway, or that I'll know. We're not capable of knowing the truth. And inevitably there'll be someone out there watching going, oh no, of course, I know the truth. The truth is awareness that is unchanging and ever present. Because that is one definition you could use for the truth, unchanging and always present. The actuality is that the awareness that we can know ourselves as may not be as unchanging and ever present as we have concluded, because we might be aware of life and the concepts were given to us and says, you are the awareness. I actually said it myself today, you are the awareness that is ever present and unchanging. However, I also pointed out in deep sleep there is no experience, and if there's no experience, where is the question of awareness? So it is maybe ever present in the manifestation, meaning in experience in daily life, but in deep sleep, is it present? Now, once again, that same person might say, yes, in deep sleep there is awareness. I say, well, is that just a concept, or is that known to be fact? So that's why we might think that awareness that we can become aware of and know directly might seem like truth, but when we investigate it or label it or know it as it really is, we might find it's still relative, but maybe less relative than thinking, for example. And because it's less relative than thinking, when we rest as that, relatively speaking, it can be mistaken to be absolute. And then we say, oh, I know the absolute. I know that which doesn't change, which is actually turns out to be not the truth. It's a mistake of our thinking. So, this question of, are you seeking the truth? At some point, we might like to change it to the pragmatic outcome, which is actually I'm just looking to be, to live life free of suffering.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. And I agree. Peace of mind is definitely, if you could go for something, go for that.
Yeah, because that's actually what's driving the seeking in the first place. The fact that the peace of mind or the suffering is driving the seeking. I just remembered that just to round off, one of the other reasons that what presents itself at in certain awakenings is this awareness that seems to be ever present and unchanging. That's how it presents when the awareness seems to be separate from the object of experience, the ever-changing moment. And the awakening experience tends to include a sense that the formless awareness that I am is the background of all of the objects that come and go. And so you can tell in the wording that I'm using, when that's the experience, which you may know directly, there is a sense that the awareness is not the objects, not the body, not the thoughts. Then after that, there is, I guess, a changing again in the qualitative state of the experience, where it's seen that there is no separation between the awareness and the objects, that they are one. And from that point of view, if we see that the objects are continually changing, the content of life is continually changing, and if the awareness and the content are not two, then that awareness that we said is ever present and unchanging actually turns out to be always changing, because the objects are clearly changing and the awareness is not separate from the objects, and therefore the awareness is not unchanging. So there are all these nuances that become important at certain phases and are unimportant at other phases, because actually if they become important at the wrong time, they can interfere with the various shifts. But we tend to filter out that which isn't important when it's a good thing for it not to be important. So we don't need to worry too much about something that is said that will ruin our journey.
That was actually made a lot of sense. Thanks.
Okay. I think we'll take one more question, maybe two. Hi, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. Wow.
You're welcome.
I was going to say this was the best guided meditation I've ever experienced, but I thought that was sort of a disservice to even go there. I was it's hard to bring back. Are you familiar with the phrase "realer than real"? Have you heard it as a description, or yourself used it?
What was it again? Weirder than real?
No, realer than real.
Well, I guess I've heard it before. I don't have an affinity with it myself. I don't think I've used it before. But go ahead. I know what it means.
The first time I perhaps used it or got attached to it, I had witnessed a car accident. I was walking along, and there was a collision at an intersection, and there was an experience that resulted that well, at this point, I'm going to say it was sort of like a functional deep sleep moment, given our conversation today. And I was just asking, I guess, in part out of curiosity, to what extent that description, realer than real, has ever had any resonance relative to characterizing a dropping away of mind, particularly a result of trauma, an accident, maybe drugs, maybe just because it happens.
Well, I think my response would be that we imagine life as it presents normally to be real. That's our real experience of life, or life, and it feels real. And the truth is that our experience of life as we normally have it includes a layer of thinking in amongst the experience. And so that layer of thinking affects how life is known. And that becomes what we know as real life, the way it's always put together, essentially, which, as I'm describing here, includes a layer of thinking that is sort of maybe even what we could call subconscious thinking. It's pretty much happening without us even really being aware of it. And it influences the way life feels, but it's basically what we think as real life, or life that we considered the way life is. And in an awakening moment, when thinking falls away, or in a shift, in a meditation, or a presence with the present moment as being everything arising in consciousness, for example, there tends to be a dropping out of thinking and what is often described as a direct knowing, where life is known from a slightly different or a radically different perspective than where it's normally known from. And that new perspective or different perspective tends to be a perspective where there can be the absence of this layer of thinking. And because thinking is a very relative component, or very relative function, when that thinking is there, which is what I was saying is pretty much standard, life has a relative quality to it, but because it's all we know, that is what we consider to be real. And so spiritual teachings will tell us, you don't know life, you don't know the truth, you know illusion. And awakening or spiritual seeking is about coming to know the truth. And often the life that we know, where there's subject-object relationship, then is described in those teachings as being illusion, and reality is described. Reality essentially is, that is being described in those teachings, is a shift from one way of knowing oneself and life to another, and in that shifted way, when it happens, often that layer of thinking is not there. And because that layer of thinking is very relative, when it's not there, the experience changes quality, where essentially, I guess, it feels realer than real, because a relative layer has fallen away. And it can create a sense of direct knowing, where things are known in a more apperception way, rather than through a layer of thinking, which is the thinking of, oh, I see it, and it's like this, concluding. And in an accident, or if you're aware of an accident, and it shocks you into the present moment, then the thinking layer can fall away. And it's what's described sometimes where everything goes into slow motion, and the details and what's going to happen sort of all becomes clear. So clearly the body kicks into a different mode of perception, because this thinking layer falls away. And it feels qualitatively different, and that qualitative difference is really a absence of a relative layer, which makes it feel more absolute, which makes it really mean it feels more real. And so then we say it felt realer than real. Is that a fair commentary?
Absolutely. So that leads me to the question. Relative to the word oscillating, I'm wondering if you experience oscillating, or putting it a different way, went through periods, we could say, of oscillation. And not that even so much occurring now. I guess I'm asking, do you just cope with that shifting that you reference when it arises, or you just don't even notice it anymore at this point?
The shifting back to the relative or away from the relative?
Let me try it one more way. As you were presenting today, and I was along for the ride, so to speak, I experienced the wallpaper, as we were discussing, laying across the field. It was experienced like a three-dimensional functioning wallpaper. There was a shift. And as I had a question arise, there was an awareness of that, of a blanket, of a layer, of a veil. And it was so subtle, and yet I feel I've seen that before. It's kind of like waking up first thing in the morning, and for a moment, I don't know why there'd be the question, but you maybe feel a breeze and you think, gee, do I still even have that blanket on or not? You can't tell. So that to me is like a very subtle shifting. There can be this sense of oscillating in and out of... I get stuck with the words in and out. I'm stuck there already. Have you a thought of where I'm going with this question at all?
I think it becomes... I think it sort of it changes such that the changing, the oscillating just falls away. But really the question, I guess, in what state do we remain? And I'm not even sure that the state we remain in is one or the other of the oscillating states. I think it's different again. So the stabilized, integrated state is not necessarily at all the same as the flip part of the flip-flop movement. The flip-flop movement, which is, going in and out, gradually changes, and then what we're left with is what we're left with, which may not be one or the other of the flip-flop state. So the point being is that the process looks after itself, but not at all the way we imagine it.
All right. I think I need to leave it there, or I'm going to be seeking an outcome.
Yeah, but rest in that place of being present with. It's always here. The life experience is always here, and so if you remember, I am that which is aware of even the body, and use the visual component of the present moment experience to be that which you bring attention to, and without any effort. It's without even trying to get anywhere. It's just about being present as awareness, not the body being present. But so the point of today's satsang really is, as I said, hopefully in the next week, some people will find themselves resting as the formless awareness in which everything arises more regularly than may have been the case if the satsang hadn't been heard.
Present for the satsang. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mark.